Today you become an Edo-Era Kagema, a man who sold both his body and his shamisen voice. At 8, I was sold into a Shimabara tea house in Kyoto, and at 16, I put on the furisode and received a daimyo for the first time as a kabuki youth. I was born in 1758 into a poor weaver's household in the Nishijin district of Kyoto, where my father worked all year long at one old Takabata loom, doing piecework for the silk merchants down the lane. The night my mother gave birth to me, cold rain fell on Kyoto, and she wept the whole night through, because the house had no money for rice for 3 days and could not even cook one bowl of plain white gruel. When I was 6, the Horiki famine struck Kyoto. Several children on our lane starved to death one after another, and my father sat night after night staring at the smoke-blackened ceiling beam without a single word. In the spring of 1766, when I was 8, my father sold me with his own hand to a Shimabara tea house in Kyoto called Ojiya that took in companions for night service, and from that day, I never returned to Nishijin. The mistress of Ojiya lifted my chin under the hanging paper lantern and studied me a long while, then said quietly that this child had clean features and could be kept on in the inner hall as a small page. On the morning I walked into Shimabara, my mother slipped me a cloth bundle holding half a cold rice cake and the 2 old round bronze kanei coins she had saved in secret over 3 long quiet years. At Ojiya, I learned to serve tea, grind ink, wipe floors, and fold robes, and my eyes had to learn to read the shifting moods on every patron's face at every hour of every long evening. In 1772, when I was 14, the mistress sent me to study shamisen with an old master, saying that with my clear, bright voice, I would one day surely earn great money back for the tea house. When I was 15, I shot up to the same height as my father, and everyone at Ojiya said that my face had become the most beautiful young face in all of the Shimabara pleasure quarter. A kabuki troupe master from Nakamura-zie in Edo came once to Ojiya. He stared at me by lamplight for a very long while, and the next day men arrived to take measurements for a new furisode. In the spring of 1774, when I was 16, the troupe master brought me to Nakamura-zie in Edo as the lowest-ranked wakashu apprentice, and from that day, I traveled with the company from theater to theater. My work at Nakamura-zie was painting on white ashuroi and playing onagata bit parts and serving tea, rising before the 5th watch each dawn to powder my face and returning only late at night to a cramped shared pallet. I ran bit parts at Nakamura-zie for a full year. No one remembered my name. They only called me that quiet, pretty youth with the white powder who sweeps the dressing room corridor. On an autumn night in 1774, a daimyo from the western provinces passed behind the stage of Nakamura-zie. He stopped his step and asked me softly which folded silk costume I was holding in my arms. The next day, the daimyo summoned me into the inner chamber of his upper residence in Edo. He poured me a cup of sake with his own hand and asked if I would stay beside him to serve. I knelt down and pressed my forehead to the tatami and said yes. He smiled and untied with his own hand the plain, undyed cotton obi that Ojiya had tied around my waist, dropping it to the side. That night the lamps in the upper residence in Edo burned until dawn. The retainers whispered that the daimyo had not been this delighted by a young man in many, many years already. On the 3rd day, the daimyo paid off my indenture to Ojiya with his own hand and gave me a slender coral hairpin brought back from Ryukyu, pinning it himself at the collar of my new furisode. In the spring of 1776, when I was 18, the daimyo arranged my naming ceremony himself, and from that day, I hung the lead furisode actor's signboard at Nakamura-zie and earned real money. After each performance, the daimyo often invited me onto a pleasure boat on the Sumida River to drink sake, and he held my hand in front of a full deck of guests without the slightest hesitation. One night on the boat, his haori sleeve was pinned beneath mine, and rather than wake me, he drew his kaikin dagger and quietly cut off the embroidered family crest portion of his own silk sleeve. The story of the cut sleeve spread through all 3 theater districts of Edo in a single night, and from then on the whole city knew the daimyo held only me in his heart. In 1778, when I was 20, I played one after another the great roles from Sugawara Denju Tenarai Kagami, and the people of Edo began to call me the new prize that had come from the Kyoto Shimabara tea houses. My father, too, was hired by the daimyo to manage warehouses in Edo, and our whole family rose overnight from poor weavers in Nishigen into newly favored merchant gentry of the eastern capital. In winter 1782, when I was 24, the daimyo suddenly fell gravely ill at his upper residence in Edo, gripping my hand and whispering that he wished to formally adopt me as his own son. I knelt at his pillow weeping and refusing, but that one sentence was overheard by the old chief retainer in the next room, and the next day it was carried straight to the ears of the principal wife. The chief retainer was the elder brother of the principal wife's household. He had been quietly maneuvering inside the residence for a full 20 years, waiting precisely for this chance to settle accounts. In the 11th month of that year, the daimyo died inside the upper residence in Edo, and that night the lanterns of the inner chamber went dim one after another until only I was left alone at his pillow. Before dawn, the principal wife sent word, ordering every uchicake, every furisode, and every coral pin the daimyo had given me into the storehouse, returned piece by piece without a single exception. The next day, the chief retainer sent men to ransack my small residence in Edo, claiming that under the daimyo's favor I had embezzled a great deal of money from the household coffers. They overturned every chest and carried off every uchicake and obi the daimyo had given me, and they even seized by force the small wooden tally my father had carried as warehouse master. I knelt in the dust on the highway outside Kobukicho in Edo and looked back once at the small residence the daimyo had granted me, now stamped over with thick vermilion seal papers. That night the whole family was driven into a long, empty, broken Nagaya tenement in Kagema on the eastern fringe of Edo, where I could not even spread a single clean thin futon for my mother. The patrons who had once sent their visiting cards to my gate every single day all changed their patronage overnight, and not one of them dared come to Kagema to call on me even once. In 1783, when I was 25, I could no longer carry the furisode, and the people of the troupe said my voice had cracked and my face had aged, and I could no longer play the lead youth roles. On the day I retired, I walked back to the Kagema Nagaya alone, folded my last furisode, and pressed it into the bottom of an old camphor chest, and from that day I never again dared put it on. In the 3rd year after we moved to Kagema, my father coughed up blood and died, and my mother wept until she had nearly lost her sight, with no money left to give him even a modest funeral. I sent my mother back to Nishigen in Kyoto to depend on old neighbors, while I stayed alone in Kagema working odd jobs at a small tea house and playing shamisen to earn a thin bowl of rice. In 1788, when I was 30, a great fire in Kagema burned down the small tea house that sheltered me, and even that single coral hairpin was scorched until only half of it remained in my hand. I sat clutching that half-burnt coral pin on the wooden bank of the Sumida River for a whole night, and only then did I understand that this favor had never truly belonged to me. Late at night, I dug out the 2 old round bronze kanei coins my mother had pressed into my palm long ago, and they were the entire luggage of my life from the age of 8 to the age of 30. Only then did I understand that the warmest lamp of the daimyo's upper residence in Edo could never reach this drafty, broken Nagaya in Kagema, and that favor had never been mine to keep. In 1793, when I was 35, an old tea house mistress I had known in Kagema died, and on her last day, she quietly handed me, with her own hand, the deed to her small wooden tea house. Using that deed, I opened a small tea house in Kagema called Oji Kagea, and from that day, I no longer stepped onto a stage, but only sat at the hearth pouring tea for the patrons. In 1804, when I was 46, Santo Kaiden published a Kakibon comic novel, and inside it there was a passage describing the single brightest night I once stood at the heart of Nakamura's. I closed that little Kakibon book and gave a small smile, and put it into the bottom of the camphor chest, pressed together with the old furisode beneath 30 years of old dreams. In 1810, when I was 52, a heavy snow fell on Kagema, and at the hearth I played for the last patron one short shamisen tune I had first learned at the age of 14. Only then did I understand that the most beautiful figure in all the Shimabara tea houses And all of Nakamura's EA was never the youth in the furisode, but the man no one could move any longer, myself alone. This is the life of one Edo-Era Kagema, and if you have ever given your whole self because of one sentence spoken by another, please leave a comment. Next episode you choose: A. Youngest daughter of the Heian Fujiwara house, or B. A female shinobi spy of the Sengoku Wars. Vote in the comments. This work is fictional dramatization for entertainment only.